I want to thank you for being here. I know some of you were expecting someone different today. I understand that you were expecting my husband to be here, the Reverend Chapman Harris. Well, Chapman had some things he needed to take care of today, if you know what I'm talking about. But we won't let that out. So he sent me, Patsy. Sir, how are you? Nice to meet you.
My pleasure, Patsy.
I'm surprised that you've shown up today without your hat on and your gloves, because normally in Chapman's church, the Second Baptist Church of Broadway in Madison, Indiana, people dress. They come prepared. Sir, did you bring your Bible with you? That looks like a songbook. But nonetheless, I'm here in Chapman's stead. Chapman was the conductor on an Underground Railroad unit that went through Madison, Indiana. And we're pleased that he took that opportunity to work for the Lord. You see, Chapman came from Virginia because he had a calling that said that he needed to help people. He needed to help people in bondage. You understand what I'm saying? And he took it upon himself because there in Virginia, at this particular time in the 1800s, it was difficult for a person of color not just to have a job, because they had plenty of jobs, honey, but they weren't paying jobs. A young black man could not take care of his family or his children because he wasn't paid a decent wage. So Chapman came from Virginia. He was born to a free household, a household of money. Oftentimes we like to think that people of color in the 1800s had no money, but Chapman's family owned horses. They owned a plantation themselves. So when Chapman got to Madison, Indiana, he had knowledge of how to care for and how to use horses. As a matter of fact, we had a horse that could go to Greensburg, Indiana by itself and turn around and come back. You see, we had a false bottom wagon. They would deliver packages to Greensburg, and the horse would turn around and come back. Chapman traveled all over Indiana and Kentucky as a blacksmith. He learned the trade and then went on to become a minister, a Baptist minister. His first church was there on 5th Street in Madison, Indiana. St. Paul's AME Church. He worked with Delia Webster. Delia Webster was a white woman that came over from Milton, Kentucky. Y'all know where Milton, Kentucky is? She came over from Milton, Kentucky to teach young black children how to read and write, because you know it was against the law for people of color to learn how to read or write. You could lose your life and the life of your family if you were caught doing that kind of thing. But nonetheless, I didn't come to talk about little stuff. I came to preach today. So open your Bibles, please, to Psalm 46. And it reads like this: God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. You see, Chapman knew not to fear anything because he knew God was on his side, and he knew that it was not right for anyone to be in servitude to another person. he brought this message regularly at the St. Paul's Church. You see, I actually was born a slave. My responsibilities as a 5-year-old were to carry water, take out the slop jar, lay at the foot of the bed and keep the master's children's feet warm. I carried their books. I went to school. I sat on the floor in the back of the room, but I got my education. I helped them dress. I heated the bricks to put between the covers. I washed their faces. I combed their hair. And at 5, I was good at what I did because I wanted a family. It's bad when you don't know who your mother and your father are. It's bad when somebody else calls you Patsy. I don't know if that was my name. I met Chapman when I was 18 years old, and he was 34. I lived on the Scott-Spencer County line in Kentucky, working for the Miller family. Now, Chapman, because of his trade as a blacksmith, worked for 2 years to gain my freedom. Not only did he gain my freedom, but he also gained the freedom of my son, George. Then we moved back to Madison, and we bought property on the hillside. There, he hollowed out a tree and planned on hiding parcels in that tree as they escaped down the river. Now, it was not an easy task for Chapman. You see, when he came down the river on a keelboat, the steamship that picked him up took him on down towards Louisville. Now, you know Indiana was a free state, but Kentucky was a slave state. You knew that. Yes. He fell asleep on the ship. When he woke up, he convinced the captain to let him off there in New Albany, Indiana. Anybody from New Albany? I'm glad. You see, although New Albany is in Indiana, they were not sympathetic to slaves. So Chapman had to walk on the Kentucky side all the way back to Madison in the middle of the night. Dangerous. You see, the Knights of the Golden Circle, the precursors to the Ku Klux Klan, were stationed on every major highway going into and out of Madison. But he made it. And he knew that by the grace of God that he had a job to do. That's why Psalms 46 has left such a great impression on my life and on Chapman's life and on our 9 children. I know I don't look like I have 9 children, but I do. You see, you can find out anything that you want to know about me just by going to the courthouse in Jefferson County, Indiana. And there you'll find my entire family. You'll find that I have a mole on the right side of my face, that I am a very stout woman with childbearing hips. You see, every year, because of the Fugitive Slave Act, all people of color had to go to the courthouse to register. Yeah. We had to pick up our children, lock, stock, and barrel, and go down to the courthouse and let them find if we had any marks. Yes. They examined us just like they examine any piece of property, and they wrote that down. That way they'd know that anybody of color that should not be in Indiana would be hung. So, the mole on my face, my childbearing hips, my large husband. See, my husband was over 6 feet tall. He's big, bold. They called him the Black Apostle of Freedom because he was so large. The Fugitive Slave Act was enacted because Indiana did not want any extra people of color to move in. Why? I don't know. You see, it was during a time when abolitionists and those fighting for the rights of others were persecuted. They were persecuted, and their lives were put on the line. At one point, 2 gentlemen tried to drown an abolitionist in the Ohio River. They pushed him underwater, held him down, and had it not been for Elijah Anderson and Chapman Harris and my oldest son, George, and Chapman Jr., they would have drowned him. Let me tell you about Elijah, another conductor on the Underground Railroad. Chapman's very best and dearest friend. You see, Chapman was arrested on a trip to Louisville, Kentucky. Again, my husband was extremely large, extremely dark, and very imposing. So you'd recognize him in a crowd most anywhere. In Louisville, they arrested him. They arrested him because they knew he wasn't supposed to be there. On his possession, they found flint, money, a pocket knife, and his freedom papers. They threw him in jail, but because of our dear friend Elijah Anderson, who went his bail, he was allowed to come home. Chapman never forgave himself when Elijah was arrested because he was caught trying to help slaves to freedom. So in Frankfort, Kentucky, where they took all people of color when they were arrested, Chapman and Elijah's daughter went down to pick him up 10 years after he was arrested. When they went into his cell to release him, by some unknown reason, Elijah was found dead. So Alice and Chapman brought Elijah back to Madison to be buried at Springdale Cemetery. No questions asked. Dead on arrival. This was the same Underground Railroad conductor that had gone Chapman's bail and allowed him to come home from Louisville, Kentucky. You might want to know about my children. I'm very proud of them. George Henry, the oldest. Remembering that I was married in 1841, George Henry was born in 1840. The Millers could have kept my son, but they allowed me to bring him to Madison with me. This did not always happen. You know, when parents had good genes and as solid as my husband was, they knew that this young man would be capable of working many long hours in the fields. But Chapman worked an extra year to bring him home with us. Charles Walker, born in 1842, both Charles Walker and George Henry went to Texas when the slaves were freed. And during that time, of course, they didn't know that they were granted their freedom. But both George and Charles went down to help the soldiers tell the group that this was the case. Mary Elizabeth taught at Broadway School, the first commissioned colored school in the state of Indiana. Virginia taught in Sparta, Kentucky. There was a school for people of color, and she was commissioned to teach there in Sparta. And of course, there was Theodore and Eliza and Gertrude, and they all were very, very helpful with storing property, loading property, feeding the property, helping to find clothing for the property so that they could go from here to North Vernon to Greensburg and on north. From the looks of your faces, I can tell that this is troubling to some of you. But rest assured, there were many people along the route that helped slaves to freedom. There was the Quaker group. There were the group of missionaries. There was the Neels Creek Anti-Slavery Society from Lancaster, Indiana. And they all did their part. Slaves hid at Clifty Falls State Park. They hid in Hanover at the sawmill. They hid at Eleutherian College. And they hid in many places along the way. I'm pleased to say that my children were our biggest help up until the time that Elijah and William Anderson came to Madison. As children, they would make up games to entertain themselves and make marbles out of mud and dry them in the sun. All my children worked hard. They could cut tobacco at age 6. I could cut tobacco at age 6. My children were adept at carrying water and stacking hay and picking corn. Indiana was the pork capital of Indiana. When you went into Madison, there on the west side of the road, just before you get into the city limits, is a house that has palladium windows, and that was the last stop before going downtown on the pig route. And my children could work those pigs. They could feed those pigs, and they made sure that none were lost. At 8 years of age, Theodore could stack tobacco like a man and was proud to do so. Free blacks were often kidnapped and sold back into slavery, which was a very sad and most difficult thing. Chapman often worried that my children or he may be recaptured and taken into as slavery or given to the master as a gift. But fortunately enough, this did not happen. Instead, they spent their days on the river watching the steamboats go through so that they could help those to freedom that just happened to be coming down the river. It was difficult being a slave during the 1800s. You had to pretend like you couldn't count. So if you were paid and not paid the correct amount, you could not question. If you could read, you could not admit it. Unfortunately, there were times when I or my children would forget, and that brought the wrath upon us. Many times the Sheriff Wright Ray, one of the oldest and best slave catchers in a tri-state area, was said to have gone to Canada, as far as Canada, to bring slaves back. He is thought to have brought back at least 400 total, because this was business. This was considered business, nothing but business. Slaves were considered property. When I went from living in the shacks to the house, I remember I had one hobsacking, scratchy dress. But when I went to the house to help take care of the children, I had several dresses. I was allowed to dress up on Sundays, go to church, sing out loud. You see, many times, and in Madison, at St. Paul's Church, at Broadway Second Baptist Church, and at other churches, you could worship in your church, but we couldn't sing out loud. Our voices were stifled. And music has always been a part of the slave's culture. Wade in the water, follow the drinking gourd. Those songs were meant as helps to get people to escape when you heard the bloodhounds barking and chasing, and the song Wade in the Water was sung. You had to get in the water so the bloodhounds could not sniff you out, because they would turn the bloodhounds on you and your family and your children. Songs such as, how you doing? Robert, don't make me laugh. I lost my train of thought. Yes, music was a way to communicate. Now, you all know this is being streamed live, and Robert, you just got us off track. But music was one of those ways that we had of communicating with one another. Instead of letter writing, slaves many times knew the Bible from the front to the back. Their memory of reading the stars moved them further to the north. They were intelligent people. People that believed in God, even though there was a slave Bible that had all the things taken out of it so that slaves would not know that they were loved by the same God that loved the entire world. They knew that this was the case. They knew that if they continued to act on faith, knowing that, again, Psalm 46, and it goes how? God is my refuge. Yes. God is my refuge. And they would follow this, and that was their mantra. God is our refuge. We don't have to fear. When we look at many of the operations that went on in our city, we'll understand that many of the churches were built by slaves. The wrought iron around the Lanier home, the fence, slaves. The wrought iron on Main Street, slaves. The concrete blocks, slaves. Much of what you see were because of the slaves that were in that area and the free slaves as well. Please understand that slavery was nothing more than big business. The love of money, when you could sell me for the price of a pair of shoes, when you could sell my children for the price of an apron. Organizations such as the Masonic Lodge worked diligently in long hours to make sure that the slaves could indeed find their way to freedom, and not just find their way to freedom, but to find their way to a better way of living, to find their way to a job. George D. Baptiste. And I tell you this to say, big business, slavery. Big business, 2nd Street, Madison, Indiana, a wig shop, a hat shop, a barber shop, all owned by George D. Baptiste. I say this to say slavery was big business, but Elijah Anderson and Chapman Harris had large blacksmith shops. They could travel because they were blacksmiths, making pots and pans and kettles and irons. All those things that we see today that somebody else took credit for. Delving into the Knights of the Golden Circle, at one point they stayed up all night long on the road to Lancaster to catch slaves, all night long, to see if they could find somebody that might be trying to escape. John Brown visited Madison before the uprising. In 1849, the Second Regular Baptist Church, which is Broadway Second Baptist Church, was purchased. And it's in Deed Book 5 in the courthouse, Deed Book 5. Anything that you want to know about, all you have to do is just research it. And you'll find that it's all right there. Griffith Booth, George D. Baptiste, George Henry, they all risked their lives and their financial assets. It wasn't just for the moment, it was for life, a better life. I'm proud to say that I'm no longer a ghost. I'm buried at Springdale Cemetery on the north side of the hill, along with my husband Chapman and 3 of our children. I know you really thought that I was Patsy, but I'm not. Chapman worked at Broadway Church for quite some time, and Patsy and her children worked at the school, and my sons were, Chapman and Patsy's sons, went all over Indiana with the regiment. When you're in Madison, if you would, take time to go up the hill, and you'll see the graves still standing. Yeah. Still standing on the hillside. You'll also find in the obituaries, if you check the newspapers, that Chapman was called the Black Apostle of Freedom. You'll see that I, as Patsy, worked diligently so that Chapman could not only be a blacksmith and a minister, but he could do the Underground Railroad work. So the job of a pastor's wife is not easy. Does anybody have any questions? You're so quiet. This is not a topic That's always a fun topic, but it's so important that we know about our history, because if we don't know about our history, we just continue to repeat and we continue to make the same mistakes. We continue to feel afraid of one another because you don't know who I am and I don't know who you are. We think that we're different, but we're more alike than different. I want the same thing for my children as you want for yours. I have a desire to be free. I want to be able to come, to read, and do things that are particularly of interest to me, whether it's crocheting, singing, or another hobby. Now tell me, what questions do you have? And you can ask me about, you can.
What do you know about the Underground Railroad through Vernon?
I don't know much. I don't know much. My research is mainly with Madison. And it has such a rich history that it would be impossible for me to, most people from Madison came over from Kentucky or Virginia. We just imported them and kept them. Yeah. But I do know that wagons would go up to Vernon, and from Vernon on, Greensburg was the next big stop. Yeah. Yeah.
Where were your other children buried? The other, it's 11
My-
children, correct?
I had 9.
Okay,
Yeah.
only 3 are buried there?
Well, they don't have tombstones. So there's what do I want to say? There is a fund through the Springdale Cemetery to get tombstones for them. Now the 2 oldest boys are buried in Texas. Yeah. And then Sparta, Kentucky is where another one is buried.
So where is the Springdale Cemetery?
When you're in Madison and you go to, let's see, Sherry, when you go down, oh, I didn't know that was your name. When you're going over the hill, downtown, then you'll go to,
Hanging Rock.
yes, yeah. From the gym, you just go to Hanging Rock. And if you could get in from that end and could jump over the fence, and at one time, that fence was open so you could come in from that direction. Then you would walk probably about a half a block, and on the left-hand side of the hill. The difficult thing about where Chapman and Patsy and the children are buried is that snakes in the spring. So, yeah. And that, so you want to be sure when you go to check with the caretaker to make sure that, that's the biggest thing about Springdale Cemetery, or this
They're actually on the hillside.
on the hillside.
But is that in the area where most of our people?
No, as a matter of fact, not. If we're looking at that first mausoleum on the right-hand side, as you're coming in, if you're looking at that first mausoleum, if you would go to the left of it, then you'll find
Left of the mausoleum.
you'll find Grandma and Uncle Joe and that group. And then on the hillside to the left of that is where you'll find
It's
Chapman.
almost in the entrance there.
Yeah, it's up pretty high, yeah. And in fact, it wasn't discovered there probably until about 10, 15 years ago. That was all overgrown with debris.
Do you know where the cemetery is at in Sparta?
Which one in Sparta?
The one he's buried at in Sparta?
No, I don't. But my understanding is that at the old Sparta Colored School, there were graves there. Yeah, yeah. There's a cemetery, a Civil War cemetery on Bergadine Road in Hanover. And when you go out to that cemetery, I've got to think of, It's on the north side of 256. You just go just a short ways to, I think, to the first electrical pole, and go through the Vica Minor, okay, that weed that grows in cemeteries, and you look out upon that grave site, and it's taken care of by the Schaefer children. It looks like this. And it's absolutely breathtaking. The coffins were wood, and where they have, and there's like a big stone with the date in it and that was a colored cemetery. And then the Daughtery Cemetery is further out in Hanover, and it's up on a hill as well.
I think they're watching today too.
Well, good. And then Bethel Cemetery out past Hanover, what's the name of that subdivision? Do you remember?
Chapman.
Chapman. Past where Marcia lives. There's another, it's Bethel Cemetery. And that's, you get so much information from cemetery records and the courthouse as well, and from obituaries. What question do you have? Yes.
What role did Madison, Indiana play in Harper's?
Oh gosh. Harper's Ferry was a big deal. And what happened was the conductors on the Underground Railroad weren't ready. They were not ready. So when John Brown came to Madison and he met down at George D. Baptiste's barber shop, Chapman and Elijah said, hey, we can't do this. You got to settle down, blah, 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 blah. And some of the conductors wanted to go ahead with the Harper Ferry revolt, and I think that's probably, I don't know this, but a study showed that's probably why it did not go as far as it should have. Yeah. They just were not ready. Sometimes we want to act. When things aren't going our way, or there's injustice, we think, let's just go ahead and picket. Let's just go ahead and strike. Let's just go ahead. But it takes some planning, and they did not have enough planning to do that. Yeah.
He was 23.
23.
John Copeland.
And the hangings were like a big event, so that people would take their children and their wives, and they'd get dressed up to see black people tortured and hung. And there are many ways to kill a person. You can do it with hanging, and that might be the fastest way. But when you use words and a job and laws to kill someone, that's a death that just goes on and on and on and on. And it's so unfair, and it hurts so bad when you watch your children hurt, or you watch your spouse hurt when they get that pink slip, because they are the wrong color, or they get passed over for a job because someone thinks that they're a person, even though they're not actually qualified to do that job. I need to stop now, don't I? And sometimes that happens, doesn't it? It's wrong, but it happens. And I think that is a death that is just uncomparable. When you don't know what's going to happen every day, you wonder, what in the world is going to happen today? When people that are in charge of workplaces, and those of you that have children in workplaces understand what I'm saying. Okay. Yes. I'm glad you have a question. And it's nice to see you here today, too.
Thank you, we're glad that you're here. I teach fourth grade, so we teach Indiana history at that grade level.
So you know about the Fugitive Slave Act.
Yes, I do, and I talk about slavery with my children and instill in them that it was a horrible time in American history and not to ever repeat it. But I also talk about the songs like Follow the Drinking Gourd and all that, and I see that you have your quilt up there. And I read this book about Sarah and the Freedom Quilt and how she and her mother, when they would hear the drivers come in and talk with the cooks, that they would pick up snippets and they would sew it into the quilt.
Yeah.
And then they left the quilt behind so that other people could escape.
Yes. Some of that is true, and some of it is myth. But the part that tells how many miles between safe houses. You know, slaves could, it's difficult for me to go from meters to miles. But they knew this stuff. They could read the stars. They knew that it was 10 miles between each safe house. When I ran a marathon, I thought, my gosh, this is 50 miles and it'd only be 5. But slaves, they knew this, and they would put dots to tell how far they were from someplace. They would use the quilts to let people know which were the safe houses where they were. Some of these quilts actually are from post-Civil War era, but the ones before that, like the flying geese, would tell you which direction to go. Okay, the log cabin quilt with the black center. You know, most chimneys are rust-colored, brick-colored, but the black chimney, you knew that was a safe house. You knew where to find clothes. Slaves were, we like to think, well, not me, but sometimes we think that slaves were content just to gather around on Saturday night dancing and having a grand old time. They were planning. They were planning. They were reading the scripture that would tell them where to go. To give up your life, for freedom, to know the scripture from front to back and never have a book, that's pretty smart. As Pasty Harris, I learned much of what by age 5, 6, cutting tobacco at 8. I learned from just sitting in the back of the room. Moses Broyles was at Eleutherian College, and he would go with his master's children to school. And then when he got smarter than the kids, the master said, "You got to go. You got to go." He kicked him out. That's just not right.
How did they learn to read the stars?
How did they learn to read us? Because they were smart people. Yeah.
Was it just generational knowledge or
Study. When they were put on ships and put underground, let's think about this a minute. They were put on ships in the bottom, shackled together. But they would sing, and they would keep their spirits up. The person that they were shackled next to may die, and they had to smell that stench. They'd come in and hose them off. Yeah. But they kept singing, and they kept stepping out on faith because they knew that there was an answer somewhere. They learned, and we'll say this, you learned how to crochet because you wanted to. Can you imagine wanting your freedom so badly that you would learn to do whatever? One of the things that mothers would teach their young girls was how to suffer and not have that suffering show so that they would not lose their life. Now, you know what I mean by suffering. But young girls, 8, 9, 10 years old, were taught not to show fear and not to fight so that visible signs of a struggle could be seen by the woman of the house. Slaves were put in a precarious position that they had to do many things. Something very simple is I used to watch my mother cook, and I thought I could do whatever she did because she made it look so easy. Can you imagine the recipe for Jack Daniel's liquor up here and making it look so easy that somebody stole the recipe? Yeah. Slaves were they were, what I want to say is, they were just like everybody else in this room. There were smart ones, and there were some that really, really, really wanted to be free and wanted to learn. And then there were slaves, understand, that sold each other back into slavery. So the whole point here is we're all the same. We're more alike than we are different. But we just have to be open enough to give one another a chance. I can talk about your IT person a little bit. It took him College Hills. The name of the place is College Hills. But it took your IT person, and not because it's me, it's just because it took him almost 10 minutes to get this on me. Almost 10 minutes. Whereas I, on the other hand, would have said, here, Chris, stand up and let me put this on you. Just look here, just get this right. but I think we're all the same, except we're a little afraid of each other. Huh? We're just a little afraid of each other. And that's not how it's meant to be. We're brothers and sisters. We all have the same father. Yeah. What other questions do you have? And Ray told me that the name of the cemetery on the other side of College Hills is Bethel Cemetery.
We are blessed to live on a home that was a part of the Underground Railroad. My husband restored the home, and there's so much history there. And I just can't hardly stand the thought of Wright Ray because there's lots of documentation of him. Do you know what became of him? Because
He was mean. He was. We had our bicentennial in Madison some time back, and he and I had to stand together. And it was funny because he looked at me and he says, I never liked you. And I said, and you understand, I hated you. The gentleman that played that role was nothing like that. But the Sheriff Wright Ray, he and he did his job. He was a bounty hunter, and that was his job. Money, money, money. And my understanding is that he died a terrible death. Yeah, a terrible death.
His great grandson come over and baled hay on that farm that we live on.
Yeah, he's a famous figure in history, in Indiana history. I don't know if you've run across that name or not. Sheriff Wright Ray. Yeah. But you think about this, he went all the way to Canada, to bring back a slave. Yeah. How many of us have that kind of stamina that that we would do that? Oh yeah, if our child was on the other side of the road, boy, we'd knock down a semi getting to the other side, wouldn't we? If someone we loved was, hurting, we would. But he was in the business for the money. And Indiana is a hotbed not just for the Underground Railroad movement, but it was a hotbed for the Klan. And the Knights of the Golden Circle, Madison, Indiana, Lancaster, Indiana, VV, Indiana, were all in that area. Hate groups have different names now, but they're still hate groups. Anybody else? You've been an awesome group. I know there's one more question. Thank you. I know there's another question.
You said,
Hush.
you said that they kept their spirits up.
Oh, yeah.
How?
You know, and I'm glad you asked that. So I'm going to throw it back to you all. I said they kept their spirits up. And they did that through song and scripture. And one of my favorite scriptures is the 46th Psalm, you know. And in scripture, David had left with his men, and when he came back, their wives were gone, the kids were gone, they had burned the place down, you know. And finally, David had to wake himself up and cheer himself up. And I have to say, there's probably not a person in this room that has not felt so low at one time or another that you had to look up to see your feet. Whether it was a disaster at work, a disaster at home, a disaster on the news. You know, when we look at the news and these plane crashes and you just think, my gosh, what next? Then if you don't have faith, I don't know how you make it. I truthfully don't know how. You can, you know, pull yourself up into a happy place knowing that the battle is already won. And slaves, well, when Chapman Harris came to Madison, he came partially because he couldn't get paid for working. He couldn't, you know, he lived with his mother and they had property, horses, money, but he knew that he couldn't get his rightful salary. And I think there are times when we allow ourselves to drop down in that hole and woe is me and I'm never going to get any better. But I believe that most slaves knew that there was, hence the song, I'll Fly Away. Some glad morning, when this life is over, I'll fly away. You know, this is not a song for the Underground Railroad movement, but I think of Horatio Spafford. Do y'all know Horatio Spafford? When peace like a river attendeth my soul. How come you're not singing?
Thank you. When peace like a river attendeth my soul, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul.
With my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul. Horatio Spafford, thank you so much. That was just absolutely fantastic. Once more, we're saying, you know, we're all the same. We're all the same. Was that not beautiful? Yes. Horatio Spafford lost his 4 daughters in a shipwreck. Not only did he lose his 4 daughters in a shipwreck, but he also, his business burnt to the ground. And what he did was he reached inside because he knew there was a God that governed everything at all times. And he penned that song. You did it extremely well. I think I'd be laid out on the floor somewhere. Yeah. Did that answer your question? When you think of what it is that you want more than anything, what would you do for that? What would you do for your child? And I think Horatio Spafford, when I think of Horatio, I always think of that movie, Horatio, CSI Miami, Horatio, yes. But Horatio Spafford, to think that he could pull himself up and do that. When you think of David, here he was. He was just heartbroken. I think of so many things that are possible because we trust God to get us through. And you can't do anything. I mean, you can't even research history unless you have faith in God. You want to do second verse? Whew. I got my heart. Yes.
I don't know my family's history, but if I had a family that treated people poorly back then, I'm going to say, this is horrible. This day and age, still when you think what we did, maybe as white privileged people in the past. I'm sorry.
And we wear that. Thank you. Thank you very much. To say that you're wrong, to admit that we've made a mistake, and we all have made mistakes. We all make mistakes, and we retaliated, but once again, vengeance is mine. There have been times when I thought, if I had first of all, I had to know how to use the equipment, but if I had the right equipment, I'd be angry enough that maybe I might want to mow somebody over. And what would that prove other than me going to prison? If I ever have to go to prison, look out. Anybody else? I do hope that you'll take the time to find out about your family history. Maybe your family was a group that was very active on the Underground Railroad movement, But there's nothing like the love of God that will get you through whatever it is that you're going through. And to think that most of these Underground Railroad conductors were ministers. Chapman Harris had the opportunity to go to Indianapolis and be the doorman at the Capitol building. He had opened many of the legislative sessions with prayer. Yeah. And then you think of George D. Baptiste. He held President Harrison's head on his deathbed because they were such good friends. Yeah. And when we think of this, that spirit, that belief, that whatever it is that makes us do what we do, I think one of the things that Tony, I'm not going to say, one of the things that one of the poets says, when you know better, you got to do better. Now you know, so you got to do better. And it doesn't have to be backwards. I mean, just take today, for example, and just visit the sick, the shut-in. Take the time to give somebody a kind word. And my word, you just need to be singing all the time. Yeah.
He does.
He does? No wonder you sounded so good. You were trying to trick us. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So you knew the story behind Horatio Spafford, yeah. Anybody else? Okay, I won't keep you any longer, but thank you for being here today. Thank you for coming out and spending your time with me. One of the things that I think is so important do not hurt anybody, because if you hurt somebody, you might end up going to jail. What? Yes, just a couple of things. Just a couple of things. We have in Madison a couple of things I want to tell you about before I leave. George D. Baptiste statue on the river. Money was raised by a group of women. Yes, a group of women. And we worked long, hard, and diligently to get that bronze bust of George D. Baptiste. Now, they have a full statue of him in Detroit, but we have the bust. Okay. Also, something that you might be interested in, Bill Smith. Gladys and Bill Smith lived on 5th Street in Madison, right across the street from the Stewart House, where Paul Stewart lived. Paul Stewart drowned at Crystal Beach when he was just 7 years old. Was he in your class?
Yeah. That's the
This-
first year that they
Integrated the pool.
integrated the pool.
Crystal Beach. But anyhow, this gentleman designed jewelry for Audrey Hepburn. Audrey Hepburn, and it's a fantastic book, and you're more than welcome to look at it. Ray's on the board. My real husband is on the board of Historic Madison and helped make that possible. Also, A Community Vanished is the history, just a little bit of the history of the colored section of Madison that you can look at. And then, just recently, this lady from Lexington, Kentucky did and if you should write a book about your home. It's amazing, the things that you'll find out as you're doing the research. But this lady was doing a little history on her family. And come to find out that there's a section here on Chapman Harris, because they knew who Chapman Harris was. And I think that it's just an enjoyable book. And then the very last thing, everybody needs somebody to help them. So I'm grateful that I have a real Chapman Harris, Ray Livers, my husband. He has to continually remind me. So I just want you to listen just for a few minutes. Black inventors, air conditioning unit, the almanac, the auto cutoff switch, the auto fishing device, the baby buggy, biscuit cutter, blood plasma bag, the chamber commode, the clothes dryer, curtain rod support, the doorknob, the doorstop, the egg beater, the electric, I think it's supposed to say lamp bulb, elevator, eye protector, fire escape ladder, fire extinguisher, and on and on and on. History is forever evolving. You just learn something every day. We were watching TV just the other day and found out that the person that invented the walker, that metal thing, is a black woman. She did not get credit for all of the inventions that she had. They wouldn't let her, when they found out that she was a black woman, they wouldn't let her patent any of these things. Yeah, but she's the one that did that. So I hope you enjoy this as well. Anybody else? Did I forget anything?
Where did you find your dress?
Mr. Guest said that I wouldn't be able to come back if I didn't lose some weight. I couldn't a friend of mine made it for me from that period. But, I've had it for maybe 20, 30 years, and I've gained 20 or 30 years worth of weight. So in order to get here today,
And that's the pot called the skill.
in order to get here today, Ray had to drive because I couldn't drive like this. I have two dresses. One I can hardly breathe in, but I can still breathe in this. And that's another thing. Black people were a proud people. They were a proud people. They didn't go out without a hat on, gloves, stockings, petticoats, you know. When they went out, and especially when they went to church, you know, we were laughing the other day because when I was young and we go to church, we never think of wearing a sleeveless dress. Oh, that was a no-no. To have your arms hanging out, isn't that a hoot? Yeah, or earrings, yeah. Anybody else? But we were a very proud people. Ben wore wool suits all year long, didn't they?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. 3-piece, nonetheless. Hot. Yeah. But we were a proud people and always wanted more. But you have to remember that we serve a Lord that wants more for us than we even want for ourselves. So there you go. Anybody else?
Let's give her a warm. If you haven't figured it out by now, Patsy didn't come to make you feel comfortable. That's just how she rolls. And let me also say, Sue Livers can make you feel uncomfortable also, but in a good way. But the knowledge and the love that she studied this subject is so obvious and so evident. She alluded to Broadway School. Don, if you'd stand up. So Donna, I wouldn't have said what I said to you. Yeah. So Donna, Sue, and myself attended that school. I'm younger, so I was only there for. My grandfather George Guest. I'll get that left finger later. My grandfather George Guest was a teacher there. My uncle Evan Guest was the principal. And we didn't, that's all we knew. And we were so blessed. There were so many folks that came out of that school that achieved so much. You alluded to Billy Smith, who was a world renowned. And we have several authors that came out of there. But we were so blessed to have that community. And you can see, as Sue speaks, with the love that she speaks about that era and that community, that we were in a special time in a special place, and it just makes my heart fill with joy to see her, because this gal, she can preach now. She can preach.
Are you finished?
You went over her. And also I do want to acknowledge her Chapman. He has the same depth of knowledge, particularly as it relates to the African American experience. And I'll just leave you with this. As Sue said, we share more. We're more alike than we are.
We are.
Different. And with that, I'll shut up.
Good.
And I do have a donation, because I knew you wouldn't take any money, for the Broadway Scholarship Fund.
Oh,
from
wonderful.
The church. So,
Wonderful. Yes, absolutely. I might add, if ever, I forget how many scholarships we've given thus far, but the Broadway alumni started this 30 years ago. And every year we give a scholarship to some deserving person from the Madison Consolidated School System, and you have a better chance of getting it if you have a family member that is an alumni. And as Chris was saying, the Broadway School, the first commissioned colored school in the state of Indiana, has a history that is beyond belief. Anna O'Banion, one of the teachers there, integration was nice. It was very nice. But integration also meant that a lot of people got pink slips. That means you don't have a job. That means you don't have a job. So when we think, and don't get me wrong, but you think of that, a lot of people that had jobs in black businesses or black schools were not allowed to teach in the white school. So Anna O'Banion and Mr. Malone got pink slips, meaning that they had no place to go. So Mr. Malone moved to Indianapolis and was,
If I could add to that, my uncle, who was the principal,
yeah,
went to E.O. Muncie, who was the superintendent of Madison Schools, and he said, Mr. Muncie, I need a raise. I have a family now. And I need a raise. I can't make it on what you're paying me as the principal of the school.
yeah,
And he said, I'm sorry. And so at that point, my uncle moved to Louisville and
Yeah,
went to
to
work
get a
in
job.
in a shirt factory with his degree.
With a
from
degree.
Kentucky State. So that's firsthand knowledge.
yeah, yeah. And you think that Mr. Malone became the principal of the year for the state of Indiana, but could not work in Madison. And then Anna O'Banion, she would tutor in the city of Madison, but she couldn't do it in the white schools. She could only do it in the evenings at Eggleston School. So these people that were intelligent, knowledgeable, degreed, lost their jobs. And you know, it's always different when you hear somebody got a pink slip, that's somebody else. But when you're that person that's suffering without a raise to take care of your family, and that's what brought Chapman Harris to Madison, is the fact that he could not make a living for his family in Virginia. Enough. I know y'all are hot and tired. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
You didn't get much done, lady. Well, thank you very much. You were busy.
It's funny how different places, the same things, integrated. Yeah, we had a lady,